Okay. Okay, we're going to get going. I want to welcome everyone this morning. We're going to get started, so I invite everyone to settle in. Good morning. My name is Carl Gershman, and I want to welcome everyone to this forum with the 5 anti-corruption activists who this evening will be receiving Ned's Democracy Award in the U.S. Congress. Like many other activists whom Ned supports around the world, their work builds a bottom-up pressure for democratic accountability and the rule of law that is the bedrock of responsible democratic governance. Like you, I look forward to learning more about what they do, what they've accomplished, the risks that they have, the enormous risks that they take encountering kleptocratic officials who accept no check on their power or their ability to steal public resources. This is an important moment for the National Endowment for Democracy because in addition to the award ceremony this evening, we're celebrating 2 anniversaries. Some people think that the big news tomorrow, June 8th, will be the Comey hearing in the British election, but here at NED, we're focused in such a single-minded way on our mission to support the kind of people we're honoring today that we'll allow nothing to distract us from commemorating tomorrow the 35th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's Westminster Address, which is the great speech that he gave that launched the process leading to the creation of the National Endowment for Democracy. We're also celebrating the 15th anniversary of the Reagan-Fussell Democracy Fellows Program, which is named after our 2 founders, President Reagan and Democratic Congressman Dante Fussell, who wrote the NED Act and managed its passage through the U.S. Congress in 1983. I want to note that 3 of our awardees, Rafael Marques from Angola, Claudia Escobar from Guatemala, and Khalil Parsa from Afghanistan, are either former or current Reagan-Fussell Fellows. We look forward to hearing from them and from the other 2 awardees, Cynthia Gabriel from Malaysia and Denis Bihus from Ukraine. But before we do, I want to welcome a very special person to the NED. Senator Ben Cardin is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and represents my own state of Maryland in the U.S. Congress. And he's a passionate and consistent advocate for democracy and human rights. It was his uncompromising advocacy that led to the adoption of the Magnitsky Act in 2011, which is the most significant piece of human rights legislation, in my view, in the last generation. Senator Cardin took the lead last year in gaining the passage of the global Magnitsky Act that allows the United States to sanction any individual who is responsible for gross human rights violations committed against human rights defenders or against anti-corruption activists who expose the kleptocratic crimes of government officials. The law also allows sanctions against such government officials. It's exciting to report that legislatures in Canada and in Europe are now considering the adoption of their own version of the global Magnitsky Act. Earlier this year, Senator Cardin and Senator David Perdue of Georgia introduced a new bill, the Combating Global Corruption Act, that would require the State Department to assess in a public report the degree of corruption in all countries and then require accountability and transparency measures to be implemented as a precondition for U.S. assistance to countries with high corruption ratings. If passed, such legislation would greatly elevate the importance of countering corruption in U.S. foreign assistance and diplomatic engagement, much as the annual State Department and reports on human trafficking have focused U.S. and global attention on these issues. Senator Cardin is a champion of fighting corruption, one of America's greatest advocates for human rights and democracy, and one of Ned's best friends. And it's really an honor for me this morning to introduce him to you. Thank you.
Carl, first of all, thank you for that very, very generous introduction. It's really my pleasure to be here. I was looking forward to be here for, I guess, two reasons. One, to show my appreciation and acknowledge the courage of the 5 honorees that you have here today for their amazing work to advance anti-corruption in some very hostile environments. And secondly, Carl, I'm here because I'd do anything to get away from the Hill. If you could figure out a way to keep me here all day, I would appreciate it very much. My only regret is that you do have internet service here. If you didn't have that, didn't have to worry about getting a tweet from the president, I would feel even better. But it really is a pleasure to be here. And I had a chance to talk to the 5 individuals that you're going to hear from shortly before we came out today and listen to some of their courage and some of the things that they're doing. And I just thought for a moment that, yes, as Carl pointed out, I get acknowledgments for a lot of work that I do in regards to advancing human rights and anti-corruption and democratic principles. In reality, first I should acknowledge that I have extraordinary staff that do this on a daily basis and travel around the world to deal with these problems. So I do want to acknowledge Charlotte Oldham Moore, who has been in the forefront on a lot of these bills, Algene Sajri, who's here also, who does incredible work, Jim Green. It's a team that has put together real efforts to see where we can advance American values around the world. So they really deserve a good deal of the credit. And then there's Jody Herman, who's your vice president, who I had the honor of having as my chief of staff when I first took on the responsibilities as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I took over that responsibility in the middle of a major battle. And Jody's steady leadership on our committee staff allowed us to, I think, show one of the best moments of the United States Senate. And I thank her for her extraordinary help and leadership on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So we get acknowledged for what we do in the comfort of the United States of America. If you're going to take on battles, you do that because you believe it's right, but there's not a personal safety issue. The 5 people that you recognize today took extraordinary risks in stepping forward in their countries in order to advance what's right for their countries. So they're our heroes. They're the ones who really are making a difference. And I want to be here today to publicly acknowledge the inspiration you give each one of us. We're motivated by your actions and the risks that you've taken in Ukraine, Afghanistan, Guatemala, Angola, and Malaysia are not countries in which you are guaranteed your safety. And speaking out against the establishment doesn't always get you a pat on the back. It can get you a bullet. And that is courage that inspires all of us. Carl, I appreciate you acknowledging the 35th anniversary of President Reagan's remarks in UK. It was an inspirational moment about the infrastructure of democracy that led to NED. And NED has been an incredibly valuable resource that we have in America and in its global reach. And we thank you for that. And the 15th anniversary. I also want to acknowledge the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. 70 years ago, the Marshall Plan was initiated. And it was a defining moment for America's engagement versus isolation. Prior to World War II, America thought that isolation would be acceptable. We then fought a very important war for democracy that was critically important to stop the types of atrocities that we saw around the world. But it was a very costly war. And the 2 years following World War II, the United States spent about $15 billion in emergency humanitarian assistance to help the people of Europe. It was the right thing to do. The Marshall Plan was a $13 billion investment. And it came with a commitment to rebuild Europe so we could have a strong transatlantic partnership. And it worked. What an investment that was. America's strength is in our ideals. The Marshall Plan was based upon our ideals to develop democratic countries and economic powers in Europe. And it worked. It was interesting that the Soviet Union decided not to join, and their form of government, communism and totalitarian and corrupt regimes, are still our challenge today. But we have a transatlantic partnership to fight that from a $13 billion investment. When we fight corruption, when we fight for democratic principles, it's who we are as a nation. It's the strength of America. America's strength is not in just our military or our economy. It's in the values that we stand for, of good governance, anti-corruption, human rights. And when we do that, it not only helps us from the point of view of who we are, but it also saves us resources. It's a lot less expensive, as General Mattis has said, Secretary Mattis has said now, to support our diplomatic efforts, our development assistance efforts, than to pay for soldiers and bullets. So all this is part of our engagement. And today we recognize that corruption very much affects our ability to carry out and maintain fundamental peace in the world. We know that because it intensifies economic and social inequalities. We know that it drains resources that should be used to help develop a nation through corruption. We know that it's an obstacle to democracy and rule of law, that it erodes citizens' trust. It leads to radical movements and insurgencies, and it threatens not only that country in which the corruption exists, the region and the global security. So for all those reasons, we understand the importance to fight corruption. About 10 months ago, I was invited to a National Security Council meeting in the White House, where the sole topic was fighting corruption, because the National Security Council recognized that corruption is a direct threat to America's national security. So we need to be aggressive. There's just too many cases around the world where corruption is way too prevalent. We know that in resource-rich countries with the resource curse, where the corruption is taking the resources away from the people. You have very, very wealthy countries with very high mortality rates because the people aren't getting the value of their own property, their own wealth. We know that America's provided great development assistance over the years. Afghanistan, one of the countries you're going to hear about, we know we had a history of a lot of our resources going to finance corruption rather than helping the people of Afghanistan. And we see today in Venezuela, a country that is on the verge of collapse, where corruption, we can't even get our humanitarian aid in without it being diverted for corruption. So we need to do a much better job. Now, I want to just be a little bit more optimistic here, because the people of the world recognize that they can change their country. We're going to hear a little bit about the Ukraine today, and I was in the Maidan shortly after the protest moment and saw the courage of people coming out and saying they did not want a corrupt regime. They were out there protesting. And more recently, we saw people show up in great numbers to protest the relaxation of campaign corruption laws in Romania. So we've seen that there is a movement among people to speak out against it. Carl mentioned what we've done in the United States in our leadership. I look at my position as the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to advance human rights and anti-corruption agenda. The Global Magnitsky Law will be a valuable tool, not just here in the United States, but it's being adopted by many countries around the world. It's becoming the standard. And that's what we are trying to do. And on our anti-corruption bill that I filed with Senator Perdue, a bipartisan bill, and by the way, the Magnitsky bill was filed with Senator McCain. We do this on a bipartisan basis because we can get things done when we work on a bipartisan basis. But in the anti-corruption bill, we're taking the best practices that we've seen work with the Trafficking in Persons report that was initiated by Congress. Quite frankly, many of our diplomats didn't want to be bothered with having to report on how trafficking was being handled in their host countries because it just gave them another burden in their diplomacy. But we said, look, modern-day slavery must end, and we did something about it. And we now have universal reporting, we have universal standards, we have minimum standards, we have tier rating, and it has consequences. And that's what we want to do with corruption. There are best practices. There are certain courses that countries must take in order to meet minimum standards. And we should give a global report so that all countries can do better. And those that are below the standards, there are consequences. We use all government approach, so we use our development assistance to help those countries fight corruption. That's what we do in trafficking. And I'm very much inspired to get this bill done in this Congress, and we're going to look for every way in which we can get that done. Now, I want to just conclude on the fact of the realities of what's happening here in America. We got challenges. There's strong interest in Congress among Democrats and Republicans to advance America's anti-corruption agenda, and we're going to do that. But it's difficult when the President of the United States, on the day he takes the oath of office, puts our country at risk on corruption by failing to comply with the emolument clause of the Constitution. This is the first president who felt he could maintain his business interests and still be president of the United States. We see so many corrupt leaders around the world who have maintained financial interests in the business of their country. And the United States must set that example. And when the president says, well, I can differentiate between my business interest and my interest as president, it raises a question as to whether the president will be effective in dealing with these issues around the world. When the president gets trademarks for his company in China or gets royalties in Turkey for his business interests, there's a hard to understand whether there is really a clear difference between his actions as president and the rewards his businesses are getting. But it goes deeper than that. Secretary Tillerson says that we may have to put aside our principles in order to get advancements with other countries. No, we never put aside our principles. That's America's strength, and we need to speak out about it. Or when the president says things that you don't know whether you can believe. I must tell you, I was outraged by the president's comments about the mayor of London. I can't get that out of my mind. The day after we should all have been together in unity against a horrible terrorist attack in London, and the mayor, who happens to be Muslim, is singled out by the president in a way that was just not what he said about fear among the people of London. That makes it more difficult for America to have that type of moral clarity and that type of leadership globally to fight corruption. And it means we all have to work harder. The strength of America is in the Constitution, we the people. It's we the people. And one thing that this administration has done is engaged a lot more people in the political process. Come to one of my town hall meetings. We all need to be more engaged. And we can do it from the comfort of the United States of America. So let our honorees that are here today inspire us to do more. And let us make sure that Congress does what's right. We're an independent branch of government. And let's make sure that we, the people, speak out for America's strength in fighting corruption here in America and around the world. Again, thank you all for what you do, and congratulations to the individuals that are here.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. That was really wonderful, and I want you to know that in emphasizing the values, this was the central point in President Reagan's speech. He said in that speech that staying with our values is much more important in the struggle for freedom and democracy that's going on in the world than rockets and bombs. They're important, but we don't want to use them. It's the values that count. And if we can stick with our values, freedom and democracy are going to win. Thank you very much, Senator. And the Senator also emphasized the bipartisanship of his work with Senator David Perdue, Senator John McCain, who also is the chairman of the board of our International Republican Institute. And we're now going to hear a video message from Senator Marco Rubio, who couldn't be with us this morning, regrets that very much. I want to note that Senator Rubio on February the 16th held the first hearing on democracy in the United States Congress during the period of the new administration. He wanted to raise the banner for democracy, and he held a wonderful hearing with representatives of the NED and its party institutes and 3 activists from Saudi Arabia, from Cuba, and from Russia. And he's a great voice for democracy, and he's taped a message for this meeting. It's a great message, and I want you to hear it. Thank you.
I'm Senator Marco Rubio from Florida, and unfortunately I can't be with you today, but I want to take this opportunity to congratulate all of the activists receiving the 2017 National Endowment for Democracy's annual Democracy Award. Fittingly, these brave individuals who have dedicated their lives to fighting corruption in their countries will receive an award in the shape of the goddess of democracy, the very same image that young Chinese students sculpted during the Tiananmen Square pro-democracy protest 28 years ago this month. I'd like to briefly address the awardees directly. Your courage and your drive to combat corruption, to press for transparency and accountability, and advance the cause of freedom and democracy around the world is inspiring. Your fight is not in vain. This week also marks the 35th anniversary of President Reagan's Westminster Address on freedom and on democracy. In his address before the British Parliament, Reagan famously said, "Freedom is not the sole prerogative of a lucky few, but the inalienable and universal rights of all human beings." 35 years later, those words remain as true as ever. President Reagan pledged American support for these ideals, these aspirations that transcend culture and region and religion. And a year later, Congress created NED. In almost every corner of the globe, democracy is under threat. Authoritarianism is on the rise. Human freedom under assault and restrictive NGO laws, such as the one that was just enacted by Egyptian President El-Sisi, are used to crush independent civil society. But as many governments continue to repress their citizens, denying them their God-given rights, the yearning for freedom only grows. These individuals look to our country, to America, to help champion and support their cause. This means that for those of us who believe in the merit of this work, the burden is on us to continue to make the case for why these universal values must be infused and inform our foreign policy. We must continue to explain why the support of emerging democracies is a core U.S. national interest. Sometimes, as today's honorees can no doubt attest, the victories feel like mere inches. A corrupt government official exposed by a brave reporter, a village election in a repressive system, a young activist able to circumvent an internet firewall, a political prisoner freed after years of advocacy on their behalf. But we must not despair. The ash heap of history is the destiny of the oppressor, not the oppressed. And so thank you to the National Endowment for Democracy for everything that you do to advance the cause of freedom and carry out the vision President Reagan articulated those many years ago. May God bless all of you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. The ash heap of history was a line in the Westminster Address. It's a great line where Reagan predicts, and this is 1982, not long after the invasion of Afghanistan, where the president predicted that communism would end up on the ash heap of history, the way all other tyrannies in history have ended up on such an ash heap because of the struggle for freedom and democracy. And also in that speech, long before people had understood that something that was later called the third wave was beginning to gather steam in 1982, he predicted the democratic revolution. We may be in a sort of a slightly backsliding period today, but there's no reason to think that because of the kind of people that we're going to be hearing from this morning, and the pressure that's coming from the grassroots in so many different countries that we can't see dramatic progress in the years ahead, even though right now the times don't look terribly optimistic. We're very pleased this morning to welcome as our moderator Michelle Kosinski. She's CNN's senior diplomatic correspondent responsible for covering the State Department, and previously she served as the network's White House correspondent during the Obama administration. She also served as the NBC News foreign correspondent based in London, where she reported for ABC Nightly News with Brian Williams, MSNBC and CNBC, covering a wide range of domestic and international issues, including the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, who is a friend of the NED, and the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko in London, issues that we are intimately connected to in our work with Russian activists. Ms. Kosinski has received several Emmys for her work, and she's an ideal person to moderate today's discussion with the 5 anti-corruption fighters who will be receiving our award later today. Michelle Kosinski, and I invite the recipients, the awardees, to come up to the stage too.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. We want to welcome these recipients today and welcome you. Thanks so much for being here. Everyone can get comfortable and turn your microphones on if they're not already. And I think for this group to be described as fighters, what an appropriate word, and brave. I think those are the terms that really stand out. And as many of you know, when you look at rankings of corruption around the world, even the United States is not listed at the top. I think that surprises people who aren't familiar with this. We always think it should be, but so really we could all use more democracy and more democratic values in our lives. Less shadows, maybe less nepotism, maybe far fewer glaring conflicts of interest. And of course, I'm talking about Afghanistan. Just kidding. Okay, so let's get started by introducing everyone. First of all, Claudia here, former magistrate of the Court of Appeals in Guatemala and a legal scholar. She became the lead whistleblower in a case of grand corruption that revealed illegal interference in Guatemala's judiciary by high-ranking political officials, including the country's vice president and the former president of Congress. So Claudia founded the Judiciary Institute and the association FIDDI, organizations devoted to promoting the rule of law in Guatemala. And Claudia was subject of threats to the point that she and her family had to leave Guatemala, where you moved to the United States just in 2015. So very recently, a pivotal move for you. And she is currently, from 2015 to 2016, she was at Harvard and currently here at NED. And Rafael Marques, he is from Angola, a journalist and human rights defender focused on investigating government corruption and abuses in the diamond industry, including things like torture and murder on the scale of hundreds, as you exposed. So I know one of your writings on the subject is actually banned in Angola still. Is it censored today still?
There's some problems there.
A few problems. And Marques was imprisoned for his work in 1999 for calling the president a dictator in one of his articles. He was released thanks to work of people around the world, and his case was taken up by the UN Human Rights Committee. That ruling was precedent-setting, finding that Angola had violated your human rights. He has won multiple awards for his work and still works for freedom of expression and human rights in Angola. Sitting next to him is Khalil Parsa from Afghanistan, a key human rights advocate and anti-corruption leader. He also founded an organization supporting Organization for Afghanistan Civil Society, promoting good governance and accountability in Herat province. His multifaceted initiative mobilizes civic groups and encourages public participation to combat corruption. And Khalil, I was stunned to read that you had been nearly assassinated for your work, shot 6 times and survived. So to know firsthand the violence that can result from corruption is just incredible. We're very happy to have you here with us today. And sitting here is Dennis Bihus, a leader of a group called Tom 14, professional investigative journalists in Ukraine. Bihus launched a popular anti-corruption television program, initially broadcast and financially supported by a private TV channel, but dropped in 2016 because you and your team were investigating cases that could have hurt the interests of the channel's owners and business partners. But it is a popular program, and journalists have won a number of domestic and international awards. So thank you for being with us. And lastly, Cynthia Gabriel from Malaysia, a human rights advocate and anti-corruption leader. She has spent most of her professional life in the field of advancing and promoting human rights, good governance, and democratic freedoms. She founded the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism, which works to promote good governance and conducts a multifaceted project designed to encourage public participation in efforts to combat corruption. You've also served as the Vice President and CEO of the Paris-based global advocacy group, the International Federation for Human Rights. So that's everyone's story in a nutshell, and of course, you want to hear from everyone. So I guess, Rafael, let's start with you. In Angola, I know that there was progress made, including in the diamond trade. Your work has been so pivotal in that, and Angola agreed to something called the Kimberley process to keep blood diamonds off of the international market and to promote a good sourcing of diamonds. But there's still problems. I know, would you say that corruption is still endemic in Angola?
It is still endemic, thank you, Michelle. And I must say that I have written extensively about how the government used the Kimberley process to essentially remain
Yeah, there's a switch. Everyone have their
Yeah.
mics on. Okay, it's hard to tell up here whether it's
sorry.
Sorry. Okay, so we're talking about the problems that still
Yes.
exist in Angola.
Still exist, and the government used the Kimberley process to maintain impunity in the sector because there was no oversight from the Kimberley process, and being a volunteer process, essentially the diamond fields are controlled by government officials and generals, and they're the ones who must have profited from the Kimberley process. And over these years that I have been reporting the abuses, there was very little words from the Kimberley process about the abuses going on in Angola.
So the corruption was actually able to use the effort against corruption to continue the benefit where it should not have been.
Absolutely, with diplomatic support from the Kimberley process.
And so when you find that it's endemic and that it continues, how do you even begin to fight that? It must be discouraging for many of your colleagues there. And where do you find evidence that your efforts actually work?
I personally believe that there is more to gain, not just for myself, but for the whole of society, if we have the rule of law and we have transparency and good governance. And that has been my fight. And oftentimes people have asked me, why not profit from the kleptocracy? Because it offers money and many incentives. And my response has remained the same. There is more to be gained if we have a free society and if there is good governance.
Thank you. And in some of these cases, the work that you're doing is really targeting corruption at the absolute highest level. Both Claudia and Cynthia have encountered that, given that these included former leaders and the current leader, where there's, in Malaysia, of course, cases going on in 5 countries right now, including the United States, to try to find the money, trace it back to, in your case, the Prime Minister. So when you're targeting it at that level, the danger to yourself is great. as you've discovered, and the tentacles of it, I'm sure, extend where you go everywhere. So talk to me a little bit, Claudia, about when you realize that it's at that level, how best to try to get at it when it seems most difficult.
Well, for me, maybe I had some previous experience with corruption in the judiciary since the moment I was appointed. So when I denounced every time that I did, my life was threatened, and I had the backup and the support of the Supreme Court at that time. So all those things prepare me for the moment when I had to face this head of Congress that offered me to be elected in a process of appointment of magistrates for the Court of Appeals. So I think I was ready, to denounce corruption, so I record the conversation to protect me. And that was the way that I could prove that he was trying to influence the judiciary. And all my life I have defended judicial independence. My mom was a judge, and she was a great role model for me. And I knew that in that moment that he was really violating the independence of the judiciary, and that people needed to know what was going on in the appointment of the judges. Today in Guatemala, 3 of the Supreme Court judges that were appointed in that process are facing trials for corruption.
And you secretly recorded.
I secretly recorded,
that
yes.
conversation. And I'm sure that figures in so many cases around the world where just having that evidence is really what's necessary. Do you think if that hadn't happened, would anything that you testified to have the impact that it did?
No, definitely not, because corruption in my country has taken over every institution. So it will be very difficult to prove against the people in power that they were trying to force me to issue a resolution to favor them.
And today, and in part, of course, thanks to the work that you've done, Guatemala has seen a lot of progress. I mean, that's one story where it seems like it's really making an impact. And I think it's shocking to hear that because of the threats you faced 2 years ago, you had to leave your country. But in those years, at least as an outsider looking in, it seems like there's been remarkable progress. Is that gratifying to you to see? Or the fact that you're here and not there, are you seeing more still maybe what remains of the corruption that you found?
Well, for me, it's gratifying to see that people are more interested in the judicial process, in everything that happens in the judiciary. And there is a reform on the Constitution going on right now to reform the judicial system. That is something very important and that we have been waiting for 20 years in Guatemala in order to happen. So we have some some advantages, but we also need to still work on so many others.
And I mean, you being in a position of power and having that clout behind you, I'm sure it helped to expose it. You had the ability to not only see it and find it, but ways to get at it. And not everybody has that. So it's incredible that you were able to use that position to get past it and get around it. And Cynthia, I mean, in your country, in Malaysia, having the Prime Minister be the focus of this, including, I'm sure many of you are aware, but one of the cases that's trying to get to the heart of this is in the United States. It's the Department of Justice's biggest corruption investigation ever, because it's $1 billion of property in the United States that possibly was linked to the corruption in Malaysia. And I don't know if that's something that a lot of people know about in the United States, but to you, working as an activist there, tell me how, at the highest level of your government, you're able to try to expose that.
Thank you, Michelle. I think your questions really hit the most important work, the most important topics in actually the work in fighting corruption. So the first thing to say is that Senator Carter so profoundly said that it is risky business. whistleblowing, the work of fighting corruption is extremely dangerous in contexts like ours, especially when you're taking on the establishment and you're taking on the highest people who hold on to power. So this is where there is also where we distinguish between kleptocracy and corruption, because kleptocracy is about the system, it's about the people in power wanting to remain in power, despite the fact that the evidence is so overwhelming that the public funds amounting to billions of US dollars have actually been stolen. So it's Malaysian people's taxpayers' money that has been used to buy property in the United States, in New Zealand, in the United Kingdom, and so on. So there's 6 different countries that are investigating, and the Department of Justice is the one that has already filed an asset recovery civil suit to try to reclaim back the stolen property. But the Prime Minister is still the Prime Minister, because he has actually been able to hold on to power. And one of the most tragic things is that the institutions that have been tasked to investigate the corruption complaints have actually been subverted. So this is where the link with democracy is so real, that the rule of law is put to test. The people, the Malaysian people, have actually been suppressed so much that when we had mass protests to actually call for him to stand aside while investigations were still going on, he had actually arrested the protest leader under national security laws and so on. So it is very dangerous to take on the highest levels. Of course, corruption is endemic, it's pervasive, it's everywhere. But when you do that with the highest levels and the people in power, it's completely different. So just to say one small thing, I also had to tell our friends in the National Endowment for Democracy that I may not be able to leave the country if the publicity was already out there about me winning the award. So thank you to their cooperation, I actually made it here. And now when I go back, I don't know what is really in store. So they may call me a foreign agent and all kinds of things, which they have already done previously. But it is just part of having to manage the stress of fighting corruption inside the country.
And I think most recently we've heard from the Prime Minister the words fake news to describe some of what's... I don't know where I've heard that before, but it sounds disturbingly familiar. But that's the kind of thing that you face when it's at the highest level. That will erode freedom of speech. It will erode just the ability to get the information out.
Yes.
So Khalil, let's talk to you about Afghanistan. And the violence there that is linked to corruption, the resurgence of the Taliban that is linked to corruption, and you know, the Taliban originally provided people a hope for relief from corruption within society, and that's another place where corruption has been endemic and almost a part of the fabric. And U.S. officials that were there that were trying to root it out or curtail it had called it the greatest existential threat to Afghanistan moving forward. So you're being on the receiving end of the violence that can result from corruption. Tell me about the greatest difficulty in your efforts. I mean, the fact is you nearly lost your life for the work that you're doing.
تشکر از شما. میخوام قبل از اینکه به این موضوع بپردازم یک نگرانی بسیار عمده که فعلا مردم افغانستان با او دست و پنجه نرم میکنن و در طول یک هفته گذشته ما شاهد خبرهای بسیار بد از افغانستان هستیم و او حملات انتحاری و حملات تروریستی که در افغانستان در شهرهای مختلف از او مخصوصا در کابل و دیروز در هرات ما شاهد از او بودیم و این حملات جان تعداد زیادی از هموطنان ما را گرفته و به عنوان یک نگرانی بسیار عمده مردم افغانستان مطرح است که من فکر میکنم این هم قسمتی از چالشی است که توسط فساد به وجود آمده.
Thank you so much for your kind question. Before I begin, I would like to highlight that past few weeks have been some very, very difficult weeks and few days in Afghanistan. We have witnessed and experienced several terrorist attacks in the country that maimed and killed hundreds of my fellow citizens. And this morning, I am sitting here before you mourning their losses.
طبعا که فساد اداری یک چالش بسیار عمده فراروی نظام ما است. نظام ما یک نظام مطلوب برای مردم افغانستان است که مردم را به خوبی پذیرفتند و این با حضور خود به پای صندوق‌های رای بارها تایید کردند.
I absolutely agree with you that corruption is one of the biggest challenges that Afghanistan is facing, especially when it comes to good governance. The people of Afghanistan have embraced democracy and constitutional order, and we have witnessed that several times where they demonstrated their resolve by participating in the elections in Afghanistan.
طبعا که در 15 سال گذشته ما نظام و حکومتداری در افغانستان وجود نداشت بود و کلاً خراب شده بود و در طول 15 سال ما شاهد دستاوردهای بسیار خوبی در افغانستان بودیم که میشه از او جمله یادآوری کنیم: وضعیت تعلیم و تربیه، وضعیت تحصیلات عالی را، وضعیت رسانه ها را به عنوان یکی از عناصر بسیار عمده دموکراسی، بحث موجودیت خود نهادهای جامعه مدنی به عنوان یکی از دستاوردهایی که در طول 15 سال گذشته داشتیم و بهبود وضعیت حکومتداری در افغانستان. اینا از جمله دستاوردهایی است که ما را بسیار کمک کرده و جزو
Of course, you may agree with me that we have our benchmark for Afghanistan for the last 15 years, especially since 2001. And if we have that as a benchmark, we see a lot of progress in Afghanistan when it comes to civil society, when it comes to economy. You see millions of kids, they go to school. The fact that I'm sitting here, that the civil society is present in Afghanistan is very significant. We have a lot of progress on the media front, and etc.
فساد اداری در افغانستان برای مردم افغانستان، برای حکومت افغانستان بلون یک چالش هست و یک نگرانی هست که همواره به او میپردازند، در راستا فعالیت میکنند، مبارزه میکنند. در کنار از اینکه حکومت ما در این تلاش هست تا سطح فساد در پایین بیاره، نهادهای جامعه مدنی به عنوان عناصر فعال جامعه همواره در این راستا تلاش کردند.
The civil society of Afghanistan has consistently tried to combat corruption and to reduce the distance between the government and the people of Afghanistan and to fight for accountability, transparency and good governance.
مجال دارد در این مجلس تشکری داشته باشم از دفتر نت به خاطر حمایت از نهادهای جامعه مدنی و مشخصاً برنامه‌ای که اونا حمایت میکنن برای مبارزه با فساد و این بسیار کمک خوبی بوده در طول 4-5 سال گذشته که با نهاد ما دفتر نت همکاری کرده و ما تونستیم ظرفیت‌های بیشتری ایجاد کنیم و بسیج همگانی را برای مبارزه با فساد ایجاد بکنیم.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank the National Endowment for Democracy for standing with us and supporting our grassroots movement, where we mobilize public participation, where we mobilize other civic actors in my hometown, and have a fierce stance basically in fighting corruption in my province.
امروز مردم هم یک آدرس خوبه که نهادهای جامعه مدنی باشه یافتن و اونا با ما مشترکاً در این راستا مبارزه میکنن. ما در طول این سالها کمیته های جور کردیم که در این کمیته ها به شکایات مردم رسیدگی میشه، دادخواهی میشه و بررسی میشه و دنبال میشه قضایای فساد و موارد بسیار خوبی ما در هرات داشتیم.
I knew that fighting corruption alone would have not been an easy task. Hence, I made sure that we have the public support. We installed complaint boxes in main neighborhoods across the province. We created a hotline where citizens could report corruption. And we also opened our doors for the citizens to come and report cases of corruption. And as you have alluded, we have received many, many cases of corruption. And I think you mentioned the provincial council.
من مسائل خدمت شما میگم و او یک رئیس شورای ولایتی ما به عنوان یکی از کسانی که در فساد اداری دخیل بود با توسط کار جمعی نهادهای مدنی و دادخواهی‌های پیگیر از اونا باعث شد که او به عنوان یک کسی که در حوزه غرب به عنوان یک مافیای مواد مخدر، به عنوان یک کسی که همواره حاکمیت قانون زیر سوال برده بود و تخطی‌های مکرری در ولایت هرات داشت، او را دادخواهی کردیم و پیگیری کردیم و تا به جایی که او آدم در دادگاه محکوم به 2.5 سال حبس شد.
Allow me to give you an example. We have this high profile individual in my hometown. He was the chief of the provincial council, accused of numerous cases of corruption, and he's sort of a mafia in the province, involved in drug trades and so forth. So he was challenging the rule of law and institutions of the country. And as a result of our advocacy efforts, we came to the streets, we organized public protests, and he was removed from office and he received 2.5 years sentence by Afghanistan's judiciary.
ما اشاره آخری میخوایم داشته باشم که ما امیدوار هستیم به که آینده بسیار خوب پیش روی خود داریم و طبعا این راه مبارزه را میطلبه و این مبارزه به تنهایی برای مردم افغانستان و حکومت افغانستان امکان پذیر نیست و این میطلبه که همکاری‌های بین‌المللی و همکاری‌های شما را با خود داشته باشیم همچنان.
Despite all the challenges, I'm still cautiously optimistic about the future of Afghanistan. We cannot win this fight alone, and we count on our partners' continued support for our efforts.
Thank you so much. And I seem to have saved Dennis Behus for last, a fellow investigative television journalist. So I know they hate to speak publicly. But reading about your work, it's really impressive. I mean, what you're up against is something that few journalists in a place like America have to face. And if you've been looking at Ukraine, since the takeover of Crimea, there's so much focus on Russia and its stance toward Ukraine, how the US will deal with that. But inside Ukraine, it made a big jump after the revolution, but the level of corruption kind of sneaks back in, thanks to oligarchs and other forces at work. And in some ways, it seems like Ukraine may have taken a few steps back. It seems like it might be at a crucial point right now to really attack this, or let it get back to levels that we saw before. Tell me about your take on where things stand today.
Я абсолютно точно певен, що ми не маємо підстав говорити про кроки назад. Але в нас точно є підстави говорити про те, що ми споткнулись на шляху вперед.
I'm totally convinced that there is no reason to talk about Ukraine going back, but I can definitely say that we have kind of stumbled in our efforts to move forward.
За останні роки після революції, в нас є стратегічні зміни, і я вірю в те, що більшість з них, в принципі, незворотні.
In the years that have passed since the moment of revolution, we have made irreversible changes. I'm sure they are irreversible. Those are strategic scale changes.
В першу чергу я говорю про те, що суспільство стало набагато більше відкритим, доступ до інформації став набагато більше відкритим, і взагалі країна зробила величезний крок на шляху до прозорості.
Most importantly, we have become a much more open society. There is much better access to information, and all in all, the country has moved towards greater transparency.
Однак ми дискутували про це, здається, позавчора. Прозорість не вирішує проблем.
And we had a discussion about this the other day. Transparency in itself does not resolve the problem.
Вона лише їх підсвічує, і в якийсь момент дійсно може здати, що їх стало навіть більше.
Transparency only helps to reveal the existing problems, and at some point indeed you may have a feeling that the problems have aggravated.
або вдати, що Україна робить кроки назад.
Or you may have a feeling that the country is reversing back.
На сьогоднішній день головне, чого в нас немає, і це величезна проблема, тому що ми зараз говоримо про серце суспільства, це справедливі суди і справедлива судова реформа.
One thing that we are lacking most of all today, and we can see this very vividly and very acutely, is fair judicial system, fair courts.
Тому що ви не можете вирішити жодної проблеми, якщо ви не маєте можливості, не маєте змоги звернутися до справедливого суду.
If you cannot get fair justice in a fair court system, you cannot resolve any problem.
Але з іншого боку, мені здається, що за останні 3 роки українці довели, що вони здатні сконцентруватись на якійсь проблемі і разом її вирішити.
But on the other hand, the course of the most recent 3 years have shown that Ukrainians, if they focus on a certain issue, they are able to make the effort and resolve it.
Як на мене, і це моя особиста думка, але я теж українець, ми не марафонці, ми спринтери.
And it's my personal view, I'm a Ukrainian citizen, that we are not running a marathon distance, this is a sprint race.
Але якщо в якійсь короткостроковій перспективі ми усвідомлюємо, що це та мета, яку необхідно досягти, від чого залежить, не знаю, там, життя країни, ну, знову ж таки, як показує досвід, ми її досягаємо.
And I think, and our experience actually shows that if we at some moment realize there is a critical short-term goal that needs to be addressed, we focus and we get it done.
Проблема в тому, що боротьба з корупцією – це марафон, це процес, і ми долаємо цю велику дистанцію просто ривок за ривком.
But so fight against corruption is truly a marathon in its nature. What we are doing is we are dashing one sprint after another in stages.
What do you think it is about your show that you created that maybe was groundbreaking or approached it from a different way than had been done before?
Не робилось до нас в Україні чи взагалі?
And you mean in Ukraine or worldwide?
Both.
Ви знаєте, оцей мікс прозорості та значної все ж таки свободи слова призвів до того, що ми отримали можливість описувати корупційні епізоди, які взагалі не так часто зустрічаються у відкритому світі.
So the new environment of greater transparency and greater freedom of speech enabled us to cover, describe, present and feature corruption as it was happening, of the kinds that you will seldom see in the open world at all.
Give us your best example of exposing something there that opened people's eyes. If you have one. I don't want to put you on the spot. Or your favorite story. Maybe there are too many to name.
Ми щотижневе шоу.
We are a weekly show.
В нас є як мінімум 50 епізодів щороку.
So each year we do at least 50 stories and 50 investigations.
Can you imagine? I mean, many journalists will spend a year trying to uncover one thing, and you're doing one a week.
Це величезна специфіка України на сьогодні, і будь-яка професійна конференція в Україні, на якій є іноземні журналісти, починається зі слів: у вас є 4 розвідувальні щотижневі програми?
So that is what Ukraine. That is the reality of today's Ukraine. That is what's so special about Ukraine today. And when we talk to our foreign colleagues, journalists who come and talk to us, they first of all they always get amazed that we have 4 different investigative weekly programs on 4 different channels.
І всім вистачає роботи.
And each has enough work. There is no competition as such.
You could do one a day, like the big corruption case in the day.
Так, ну, вони не завжди надзвичайно великі. Я просто хочу сказати, що 4 роки тому в Україні була лише, по суті, одна програма з кількома журналістами. І було надзвичайно складно отримати там, бодай, якусь інформацію від органів державної влади.
Well, not necessarily each day we do a big revealing discovery, but I must point out that 4 years ago Ukraine only had one single program in the whole country of that kind, and it was extremely difficult to get any information at all from any government office.
На сьогодні ми маємо можливість побачити, наприклад, прозорі закупівлі до державного бюджету. Вони прозорі, вони не безкорупційні. І встановити, хто робить якісь корупційні дії.
Today, for instance, we have a new system in place that makes all government procurement absolutely transparent, and we are able to study that and watch. Transparent does not mean corruption-free, but we are able to follow and disclose who gets what corruption benefits.
І ми впливаємо потім, тобто ми розпочинаємо юридичні процеси і інколи досягаємо в них хороших результатів проти корупціонерів.
And we not only speak about that, we sometimes initiate lawsuits and against the corrupt officials, and sometimes we accomplish success.
I can only assume that you've received threats personally for the work that you've done.
Історія української журналістики, на мій превеликий жаль, знає випадки не лише погроз, а й, власне, вбивств журналістів.
Sadly, the history of Ukraine journalism knows not only records of threats, but actually assassinations.
І наскільки я знаю, 2 тижні тому у Ньюзіум у Вашингтоні відкрили експозицію моєму колезі Павлу Шеремету, який був вбитий нещодавно, рік тому.
And I know that about 2 weeks ago, Washington's Museum opened a new exhibit dedicated to the memory of my colleague Pavlo Sheremet from Ukraine, who was assassinated there some months ago.
Але якщо і в історії мого колективу є кілька силових нападів на журналістів.
So in our work history, there have been several instances when my colleagues, my team was physically assaulted.
Але я ні. Це чесно.
But that's life.
Ні, я просто хотів сказати, що мені ні.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Personally, Dennis says he was fortunate not to get anything like that happen to him so far.
Yeah, well, under such conditions, I mean, that's why you're all being honored here today. And I think sometimes what you find in a place where corruption has really taken root and for a long period of time, sometimes it might just take one big case. I feel like that was sort of your case in Guatemala, where it's a turning point, it exposes it, and then that just brings more and more out of the woodwork, people willing to come forward, people willing to address it. Can any of you contribute to that? Do you feel like that is the case at what sometimes will create a turning point?
Yes, I can just share a very simple story. Most recently, the president's son bought a watch at an auction at the Cannes Festival for 500,000 euros. And that was the turning point for the people in their perception of how the money is being spent on the country. And now we have a major crisis in accessing foreign currency. And then a document was leaked from the central bank that the central bank had transferred 600,000 US dollars, which essentially is close to the value of the money that he used to buy the watch at Cannes. But essentially, it's not a big story. I've reported on stories involving billions of dollars of money stolen, but not one caused much grievance to ordinary people than this one of the watch.
Do you think it was the visual evidence of it? What was it about the watch? Was it something that everyone could identify with?
It was the visual and the justification and the crisis in the country. He actually came out and said, well, I'm so sorry. Why you offended? I bought it because I have a charity and I fight against AIDS and it's close to my heart. And I spent this money not on a watch, but paintings. I bought paintings, and actually we checked and it was not paintings. And then it turned out to be pictures of Hollywood stars from the 30s and the 40s. So he kept making it worse. And then he announced that he had a foundation. And those paintings were to install or to hang on his foundation as a symbol that he's fighting against AIDS. And we have no malaria pills in the hospitals, no syringes. So that really got to the people to see how money is just being used in the most senseless way when individuals are suffering for the lack of basic medicine.
And I think sometimes when corruption is a part of the fabric of society at some point, or a part even of everyday life, as it is in many places, getting people to care or getting people to jump out and say, you know, it's time to find the energy or the courage to fight against it is difficult, as well as getting the world to pay attention and to care. Do you find that that has been a challenge, you know, to kind of wake everyone up and begin to fight against it collectively? And what do you think helps that cause? Maybe, Cynthia, you could shed some light on that. Because it took a long time. I mean, it always takes a long time for things generally to come to light. But to get the world, or even your own country, to get involved and behind it, tell me about that challenge.
Yeah, well, I think building a society with integrity is a huge challenge because that isn't a priority for many countries. And one of the biggest needs, or one of the biggest demands for a society with integrity is leadership. So it has to be from the top. And you cannot expect the people at the bottom to have so much honesty and integrity when the people at the top are stealing public funds and cheating and allowing corruption to actually take place in business, in everyday life. So people think that it's just how it is to survive, that you need to be a little bit corrupt or somewhat corrupt to even get a business license or a permit just to live. So if there is no leadership to show integrity, you're not going to get the people to actually strive for it and look for ways to report. But just one more point, at the bigger global level, the fight against corruption is being complicated and confused by so many other concerns. So the fake news agenda, the misinformation, the issue of going back to closing in, using secrecy laws to protect borders, to protect nations because of many more threats like counterterrorism strategies, for example. How do we deal with organized crime? How do we deal with various different cross-border issues that actually affect the fight against corruption? So it is never an issue, even in trade negotiations. It is never something that comes up so prominently to say that in order for the United States to do business with Malaysia, for example, that the agenda of good governance and fighting corruption would be, well, actually the TPP was an example because it had a good anti-corruption chapter. But in many other trade negotiations, it is not a priority for governments, and it now has to be. So I think this is the turning point in the global movement, and this is where the National Endowment for Democracy can also play a very important role in building that bridge, that democracy, trade, and the need for good governance must all come together so that the respect for human rights and democratic principles will always be upheld. But unfortunately, it's always not yet merged. It's always kept separate.
Right, and sometimes with foreign aid, that can also be misappropriated, used by the corrupt government only to help them. And we've seen that in Afghanistan time and time again. And I'm sure some of your work, Khalil, is to make sure that there's transparency and make sure that help that does come from places like the United States is used properly. Tell me about that problem and that challenge.
بسیار خوب. من بیشترم در صحبت‌های خود اشاره داشتم به که ما 15 سال گذشته میتونیم بگیم هیچ چیز نداشتیم. در حکومت داری و در نظام خود هیچ چیز نداشتیم.
I would like to begin by stating that during the last 15 years we literally didn't have much in Afghanistan.
با شروع نظام جدید در افغانستان همکاری‌های بین‌المللی به شکل گسترده از او و به پیمانه بسیار بلند برای افغانستان شروع شد.
And during the last 15 years, we have received a tremendous amount of assistance, particularly from the United States.
طبعا وقتی سیستم نباشه برای حکومت داری و برای مصرف از او و ظرفیت برای مصرف از او نباشه طبعا فساد ایجاد میشه.
When there are not checks and balances, and when there are not institutions of the rule of law, and when there are not capacity as some of the institutions, then that does lead to corruption.
ما قبول میکنیم که در طول سالهای گذشته نسبت به کمک‌های بین‌المللی هم در افغانستان فساد وجود داشته و این فساد تنها برای حکومت یا افغان‌ها نبوده، این فساد مشترک بوده که حالا ما متأثر از جور یک کمیته به نام کمیته مشترک مبارزه با فساد مشترک و مستقل مبارزه با فساد اداری در افغانستان داریم که از چند سال بی‌طرف کار میکنه.
I agree with you that the international aid led to a lot of cases of corruption in Afghanistan, but that corruption was not only particularly in the case of the country in Afghanistan. There were a lot of other international entities who were stakeholders, part of this basically cases of corruption, and as a result, a committee jointly by the government of Afghanistan and international partners were formed to do more transparency and accountability.
Yeah.
من فکر میکنم که یکی از راههایی که میتونه فساد رو پایین بیاره ظرفیت سازی است برای مصرف بودجه و برای نظارت بر مصرف بودجه.
One of the ways that we can reduce corruptions in countries like Afghanistan is, first of all, we have to build capacity that officials are able to spend their budgets accurately. And also we build the capacity for civil society to make sure that they are working as watchdog entities to monitor their activities.
یک قسمتش خب حکومت است که حکومت باید ظرفیت‌های بلند باشه برای مصرف بودجه و موضوعات از قبیل. قسمت دیگه از اون مردم است و جامعه مدنی است که اونا هم باید فعال باشن در حکومت داری.
One part of it, of course, was the government that I just mentioned, that their capacity should be built. But the most important and the second part is the people, that they should be mobilized, they should be educated, and alongside with them, the civil society to be able to work collectively with the people to combat corruption in countries like Afghanistan.
Transparency is difficult, even in places like the United States. I mean, it's difficult enough here to at times get information from your own government. So in a place where there is none to begin with, I can only imagine how difficult that would be to try to establish that and make that work.
شفافیت سازی میگه تا در کشورهای مثل آمریکا هم بسیار مشکل می باشه و من کاملا درک میکنم در کشور مثل افغانستان چقدر شاید مشکل باشه مثلا. اگه چیزی
من میخوایم که مسئولیت خود به عنوان یک فعال مدنی و به عنوان که شخصی که رهبری میکنه قسمتی از نهادهای مدنی در حوزه غرب افغانستان، خدمت شما بگم که ما هم به نوبه خود مسئولیت داریم و مسئولیت ما است که مردم و شهروندان دخیل بسازیم در حکومت داری. نظارت مردم و پیگیری مردم از وضعیت حکومت داری خودش یک قسمتی میتونه کاهش بده سطح فساد اداری در افغانستان.
I agree with you, but also as a representative of the Afghan civil society, I feel it is my responsibility to state today that I reiterate that one of the key ways that you can fight corruption is really to educate the citizens and to mobilize them and have their support to report cases of corruptions and be able to combat them collectively when they feel that they are part of reducing it.
Yeah, I think we really have a range here. People who are almost starting from the ground up or after a conflict, and people who've seen democratic institutions eroded or having to get those back. How would you say, Claudia, that organizations, governments around the world can help you and the work that you and really all of you do? And what do you need? What kind of support do you feel is lacking and most felt as you're trying to fight against these things?
Well, I believe that in my country we really need, first of all, to lose the fear. The fear of the corrupt and the powerful people that can harm you, you know.
And that's powerful. I mean, that's why the corruption continues to exist.
Because you are, scared to denounce, scared to the consequences of investigating corruption or expose corruption. So I think all what my colleagues here have said is very important, but also it's important to know that the institutions have to be strong, that we have to believe in the rule of law, and that it's something that we have to create. And that's why the institution that I found with other women judges that have helped me very closely is also focused on the transformation of the judiciary from the inside. Since the beginning, we have promoted transparency, we have promoted accountability, because it's not important that the judges are only independent. They have to be able to rule impartially to favor the people, because they are there to defend the people.
Yeah.
So being a public servant in an environment like Guatemala, where we have levels of impunity of almost 98%, it almost means synonymous of being a thief. So people don't expect public officials to take a stand. And maybe that's why it was very important in that moment that a judge had a voice and was able to prove how these powerful politicians from the Congress and from the executive, the vice president of the country at that time, were trying to pressure me. And I think that is how the people realized that they could also do something. And a few months later, people were in the streets asking the government to renounce.
Well, in a matter of weeks.
Something that we never had imagined,
Well, describe that moment when you decided to take action. Was it something that had been built up and you decided this is the last straw? Something that you had been thinking about and planning, or what were you feeling?
Well, the process of election is very complicated in Guatemala and takes a few months. So since the beginning, we realized that this was really a takeover from organized crime on the judiciary, and the people that were being included in the list that was going to be presented to the Congress were related to organized crime, to drug dealers, to people that were using the judicial system to favor them, to steal properties. So we had, as a judges and through this organization that I found, we had present different claims, but they were claims that were private, nothing publicly, And also so many organizations that defend human rights had, also present some claims. So we were aware of the problem. But I never expect the head of Congress, the leader of the political party, the closest person to the president, to come up to me and to offer me to be elected if I was willing to rule in favor of them. He said to me clearly, it doesn't matter your experience, it doesn't matter your background, all your knowledge. All that we care is what you can do for us, and we can be your friends and help you here. And you are not in the list. So if you want to be in the list, you better give us this. So
many people, I mean, and there's evidence
Yeah.
through the years of people saying, great deal, I'll take it. We'll be on the same team in this.
Yeah, that's what they expected. They never imagined that somebody was going to turn them away and say, no, I don't accept this. But few years before, my uncle, who was a colonel of the military, had been killed when he was investigating a case of corruption in the custom agencies. And he was killed by the same people from the government and from the army. So I was aware that corruption is dangerous, that corruption can kill. So I was afraid. In that moment, I was really very scared of the consequences that me and my kids could have, my family. I'm a mother of 6. So I was really worried about it. But at the same time, I wanted them to have a country where they can be free, where they can develop all their skills. And that things need to change. And that as a judge, I had the responsibility to defend the rights of the people. And that's when I decided that I was going to turn this conversation to an international organization that is helping in my country, that is the International Commission Against Impunity, known as CICIG. And this commission has made a great impact in Guatemala. If the commission wouldn't been there, I wouldn't been able to talk, because I knew it was senseless, that my life would be a risk, that had no point on doing that. But the commission really gave me the confidence that doing that was the right thing to do, and that my kids that are all here today will have one day the possibility to go back and to live there in peace.
And having the support or encouragement, maybe from outside organizations, I'm sure you've felt the impact of that too at times. And Dennis, maybe you can tell us where you feel support is needed for civil society in Ukraine. What do you think really makes an impact? Do you feel like it has to come from the kind of exposure that you make happen? I'm sorry, you don't have your... Okay, just making sure you can understand what I'm saying. Or what do you think, when you're doing your work day to day, when you're thinking, what I could really use, or what could really help us, what are some of those things?
Хороше питання.
That's a good question.
Як на мене, будь-який корупціонер, особливо корупціонер на високій посаді, це та людина, яка обмінює майбутнє всіх на своє сьогоднішнє.
I think that any corrupt figure, especially a high-ranking official who is engaged in corrupt practices, essentially is trading the nation's future for their private benefit today.
І найпростіше такий обмін, найпростіше такі речі робити у закритому суспільстві, яке ти контролюєш.
And such trade is easiest to do in a closed society where you're in control of everything.
На сьогоднішній день ми бачимо, що найкорупційніші країни, тобто країни з найбільшим рівнем корупції, вони водночас є і найзакритішими.
And we can see worldwide that the countries with highest levels of corruption are also those which are the most closed countries.
І ми просто сьогодні бачимо приклади, як високопосадовці, які прагнуть зробити, скажімо так, корупційну кар'єру, роблять максимум для того, щоб їх країна була закрита і направлена тільки на себе.
And we see many instances of how government leaders who are aspiring to rise up in corrupt ways are also making efforts to keep their countries as closed as possible.
Головний стимул і головний привід для руху вперед в Україні, і в тому числі це стосується і боротьби з корупцією, це було прагнення відкритості і інтеграції в світову спільноту.
So Ukraine's biggest incentive in all its advances, including in its struggle against corruption, would be the aspiration for the country to join and merge with the international community.
Величезна кількість реформ, яку в нас провели, були проведені для того, щоб, там, наприклад, отримати безвізовий режим з Європою і мати більше можливостей щодо інтеграції до європейської спільноти.
A number of reforms, important reforms that actually were implemented by the government were done under the pressure as prerequisites to gain visa-free travel status for Ukrainian citizens. This is a very important factor.
І за останні роки заради відкритості суспільства, як внутрішнього, так і зовнішнього, заради цієї ідеї у там, будь-який момент збиралась величезна кількість людей, які поділяли цю ідею і були готові працювати разом заради неї.
So the aspiration for greater openness of the country was a unifying idea for lots of people over the last few years that enabled them to come together in big numbers and work together for a goal.
Наприклад, одна з ініціатив нашої команди була зробити прозорим звітність чиновників щодо їх декларацій. І над цією ініціативою працювали десятки тисяч людей, які просто добровільно вкладали свій час.
For instance, it was my team's idea and initiative to mandate to create a system of mandatory disclosures by government officials, and tens of thousands of people worked together for a long time in order to make this happen.
Тому, якщо ми говоримо про допомогу, в першу чергу це підтримка відкритості суспільства і його, як сказати, орієнтації за кордони.
So, speaking of how you can support this from outside, most of all, there must be continuous support for greater openness inside the country and openness of Ukraine for the rest of the world.
So maybe some of you could give examples or talk about how that outside influence has made a difference. How much does international pressure matter? Does it have to come from governments, or do you think more and more it's coming from civil society elsewhere? Or maybe that bringing the attention to other governments. And Cynthia, I mean, this sort of international connectivity that can try to stop corruption is something that you know well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the fight against corruption at this point in time, the fight against corruption is becoming international, is global. So one example, the case of the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia. If there was no international connectivity, we would not be at this stage today. The global media that exposed the scandal was Wall Street Journal, the renowned American international media. And then the Department of Justice. So this is where I'm reaching out to the American people, because despite the uncertainties in the current landscape at the moment, I think it's so important to safeguard the independent institutions, whether it's media or the judiciary or the police and so on, because it is because you have had that, it has actually helped our cause in Malaysia. So the Department of Justice here, so far away, has actually taken interest in the corruption case in Malaysia, because the money that was stolen from the Malaysian investment firm was actually used to buy property, luxury property, private jets, luxury yachts, Monet paintings, whatever.
The usual stuff.
Yeah, so it's run into billions of US dollars.
But
So
if there was no connection to the United States, would anyone have cared, do you think?
Well, I think there were many countries that were very worried that money was laundered in their country, including Switzerland and Singapore. So they had conducted their own internal investigations. But it needed a large country like the United States to first push. And then all the other countries started to, like Singapore, for example. After that, then they started to try the bankers that were involved in the money laundering and so on. So that connectivity was something that was new, and it was so innovative that the fight against corruption saw new momentum, that it could actually work at that institutional level. But at the civil society level, we belong to this largest civil society coalition. It's about 400 plus civil society groups around the world, called the UNCAC Coalition. UNCAC is the UN Anti-Corruption Convention, the big convention that Kofi Annan, when he was the General Assembly President of the United Nations, actually launched it to say that governments had never wanted to talk about this before, but now there is a convention, and so we have to abide by it. And one of the biggest things about fighting corruption is asset recovery, reclaiming stolen assets. And so the civil society coalition is actually focusing on that global asset recovery. So later this month in Washington, D.C., the World Bank is hosting the first ever Asset Recovery Global Forum. And I believe Ukraine is one of the countries that's in focus, Nigeria and a few others. But sadly, they won't include Malaysia because it requires the consent of the current government. So it usually means that you need a change of regimes before they can actually look at how assets can be returned back to the people. So there's a lot of initiatives and process that civil society and global civil society is also engaged in. So we're part of that, and we see a lot of hope in being able to look at results in the long term. And linking up the solidarity is just so very important. And so that's why the award is not just for Malaysia, but it's actually for whistleblowers and anti-corruption activists around the world. So it lifts it to a different level.
Yeah, you've really seen the power of that international pressure firsthand. And Dennis, were you about to say something? It looked like you wanted to say
Так, я просто, якщо я зрозумів правильно, там ще рік тому, в принципі, в Америці могли сказати, що нам до корупції в Росії, як вона нас зачіпає.
Well, I just wanted to add that we see a lot of, in terms of international impact, corruption in Russia has a lot of impacts on Ukraine.
Ні.
I'm sorry, misunderstood.
Я сказав, що ще рік тому в Америці могли сказати, що корупція в Росії їх ніяк не зачіпає.
I misunderstood. Look at how people here thought a year ago about Russia. Many would say corruption in Russia has no impact on the United States.
І сьогодні раптом виявляється, що все ж таки певний зв'язок є.
But then all of a sudden we discover that some connection does exist.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Окей. І я просто хочу сказати, що отакі люди, про яких я говорив, люди, які здатні обміняти майбутнє на сьогоднішнє, вони є в кожній країні. І вони надзвичайно легко знаходять спільну мову.
And I want to emphasize that the kind of people that I mentioned, those who are ready to trade the country's future for their benefit today, you can find those people in any country of the world. And all those people in all those countries easily find common tongue between themselves.
Вони знають, які в них спільні інтереси, і вони дуже легко комунікують.
They understand mutual interest, each other's interest, and they can easily make deals.
І подібне відношення до суспільства, подібне відношення до оточуючих людей, воно дуже легко розповсюджується світом.
So such attitudes, such forms of relationships are easily spread around the world.
Це як крига, яка починається з якогось там одного місця і повзе, або як вірус.
It's like a virus or like an avalanche or something that starts with one little push and then goes massive.
І немає надто важливого значення, де буде оця початкова точка.
And that initial point of push, it doesn't matter where exactly it was located.
Тому мені здається, що досвід доводить, що це на це потрібно дивитись і цьому потрібно застерігати, де б ти не знаходився.
So yes, indeed, life shows, experience shows that we must be vigilant and attentive, and we have to caution against it no matter where you are or we are.
I agree with you because I think we all see in some places the erosion of democratic institutions. It happens bit by bit, step by step. You know, at what point do you step in and try to change it? We've seen that happen in Turkey, in Venezuela, and then it's almost like one day you wake up and is this even a democracy anymore? Is it a democracy in name only? When, you know, now all of a sudden there's control over the judiciary, or you know, it happens and we all watch it happen. So I would ask of you who are on the front lines at the risk of your own lives to try to stop this when maybe the majority isn't wanting to get involved. Is the international pressure enough?
Well, I would like to share with you that I think that globalization has allowed corruption to create very strong networks with different type of criminals, you know, human trafficking, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and sometimes the countries are not really ready to fight that alone, you know, because their institutions are not strong enough. And that's a moment when you really need the help of other countries, of the international community. And I consider that this fight needs to be focused on a regional, you know, from a regional point of view. That will be the only way that we can really tackle corruption.
How about you, Raphael? What kind of support do you think you're getting or not getting from the international community?
I think the first time I came to the National Endowment for Democracy was also as an emergency fellow. I had been ambushed when I was doing work on diamonds and basically was taken out of the country within a month or two. And ever since, and when I came here, my website for 10 months had not been online because I just used to receive these massive attacks and had no capacity to counter them or even the resources to hire someone.
You're talking about cyber attacks?
Yes, cyber attacks. And thanks to the fellowship I had here at the NED, I was able to sit down and just basically focus on a strategy on how to deal with corruption and have the peace of mind. And that continuous support ever since has enabled me to grow my website. And just to give you an idea, some of the stories I publish nowadays get as much as 300,000 readers per story. So it's how much it has grown. But also it shows how people started caring about stories on corruption. When I started, I used to be called a parasite who did not want to look for a job because it was not a job to be meddling into others' affairs. Nowadays, people understand what corruption means. And ironically, if someone as prosecuted as I have been, days ago, the Judges Association sought me out to also denounce how they filed a lawsuit against the Minister of Justice for creating problems in doing their job with some degree of independence and resources. So it means really we're making inroads, and that support from the international community is very critical, not only financial, but the moral support, and sometimes also the diplomatic support. I've been coming to the US many times now, and I've always been welcomed at the State Department, no matter what administration. And that has been quite significant in my country. to the extent that the head of the military intelligence recently held a meeting in his headquarters and showed me on a big screen as the evil paid by the CIA. But what is also important about that, we were talking here about fear. And this is a man who has instilled fear in society. And it became my resolve also to show to people that we need not to be afraid of him. And I found out that basically he uses his power and the resources at his disposal to lure young, vulnerable women with jobs to dispose of them as he wishes. And I started announcing that just as I arrived here. And then I thought, well, I'll publish the first part in the US, and if there is a problem, I'll speak about that publicly. And actually, there was a problem because one of the women who told the story ended up in a hospital just 2 days ago. And the other threatened to commit suicide because of the pressure they were feeling. And I called them from the NED's office and I said, do not be afraid. He's the one who's going to pay for what he's doing wrong. This is the time to put a stop on his abuses. And you're the heroes in this story because you're exposing him publicly by sharing your stories. So, and on Friday I will go with the second part, but it also shows how it is really important to be in a setting like this one where one can count on individual friends, institutional friends, to be able to carry out with this work and to show to these powerful people that they will not continue to act with impunity. And if they, we have a say in Angola, some elders say, if they wear pants, we wear pants too. And therefore, we should not be afraid of them.
And I think we should take some questions. I'm sure people have them. But I just wanted to ask you all quickly, though, what do you think is having the greatest impact on the fight against corruption in your countries? Is it pressure from outside governments, or is it grassroots exposure and transparency? What do you think, just briefly?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it's a combination of the help that we're getting, at least in my country, from the international community with CICIG, which is a great example. Also, the new generation that is, exposing and denouncing corruption cases, but also the judges that have taken a stand and have, permit that all these cases be ruled with independence and impartiality.
And Dennis, have you been able to get any of your reporting internationally? Has anyone else picked up on some of those stories?
Так, ми співпрацюємо з кількома глобальними світовими мережами, і ми інтегровані в глобальний обмін трафіком.
Yes, we do work with several international networks, and we are integrated into this worldwide network of journalists.
Я хотів би сказати, щодо попереднього питання, це, принаймні в Україні, це дійсно комбінація і внутрішніх сил, і зовнішніх. Причому те, що ми називаємо громадянським суспільством, воно генерує ідеї і бачення, але в нього не завжди достатньо сил для того, щоб їх впровадити.
So, but to your previous question, I want to agree indeed. The external pressures and the domestic grassroots pressures, they work together. In Ukraine, that's how it happens, because the vision, the ideas are generated by the domestic civil society, but on its own, civil society not always has the resources, the power to get things happen.
І на цьому етапі вже дійсно потрібна зовнішня підтримка.
And that's where the international pressure becomes critical.
Got it. Thank you. All right, who has a question? Right here.
Serafim Oliveira, Angola Transparency. Rafael Marques, let's talk about political corruption in Angola. Angola is going to hold elections this coming August. To what extent this election can be or could be credible fair to all the Angolans?
Actually, that's a very important question. Just two things to share. First, the current Speaker of the National Assembly is buying 250 cars for $78 million for the incoming parliamentarians who have not been elected yet and will be elected in August. The second issue has to do with the way the ruling party is using anyone with a position in the public sector in the provinces to donate money, their salaries, and their time to party campaigns. Otherwise, they will be fired and will not be able to hold on their positions, particularly headmasters, individuals with responsibility in the health sector, and others that have somehow some influence in their communities. So there is a clear blackmail to those in the public sector that if they don't do the bidding of the ruling party, they will be sacked. And that in itself is a major issue. When we count on transparency, it's not only about the ballot. Another important issue as well is that the results are not to be published at the local level and tallied at the local level. The police has the power to carry the ballots from the local level, the villages, with no opposition in tow, to the municipal level, where the votes also will not be tallied, and from there at the provincial level. So in that process, they can change the ballot boxes, they can do anything.
Do you ask yourself, where is the international outrage? And if there were, would that make a difference?
It would have made a great difference. There is no international outrage, and actually, we still have countries asking for accreditation to be observers, and we're 2-3 months away from the elections, and the government has not provided any accreditation to members of the international community as well. So, in my own opinion, countries should renounce and excuse themselves from going to play the role of international observers, because basically they will just go to rubber stamp the rigging that is already taking place with all these abuses.
Any other questions? I'm sure there are many. There on the end?
Okay, thank you. Hi, I have a question about Guatemala for Ms. Escobar. I am Kizzy McKegg. I work with McClarty Associates, the Latin America team, and we work with a number of U.S. companies invested in Central America. And these companies are very avid supporters of the Guatemalan government's real effort to combat corruption, and as well as the important multilateral and bilateral assistance that supports those efforts. Yet we have seen in some cases that I guess well-intentioned drive can also be overzealous, and in cases have created some challenges in implementation for the private sector. In particular, those have been tax cases in which there is no reasonable suspicion of criminal wrongdoing, have been quickly criminalized, and have gone to the Ministerio Público, and these companies or individuals are actually pressured to settle and pay a fine, even though there's no charges have been filed, there's no credible evidence of criminal activity. Just wondering if you have you heard about these cases? Are you concerned about them? And in Guatemala, with a weak rule of law, could that story actually lead to abuses of rule of law? Thank you.
Well, yes, I have heard about those cases. I understand what you're saying. And since I have said, we have a very weak rule of law system, then there is, sometimes the possibility that those things happen. And that's why we really need to strengthen all the institutions, because all the institutions are suffering, from corruption. And that's why people have to also be willing for accountability, be willing to denounce when public officials do wrongdoing. It doesn't matter where. And I don't know if that will answer your question.
Let's see. I don't know. Okay, right here.
My name is MD Karim. I am Bangladesh American. Democracy emerges against monarchy. Head of the government of monarchy run by inheritance law. But head of the government in democracy run by representative. When universal suffrage is done, then leadership goes to middle class. How a leader had to spend many money for his power. How you can remove corruption from this political system?
Cynthia? What's the question? I didn't understand it.
I think so. You're saying when the leadership has all of the money, how can you?
Leadership wins in election with lot of money.
Oh, okay.
So how can you remove corruption from this system?
You're talking about campaign financing, and yeah, I mean that's been an issue.
Running also after election running, he missed a lot of young people's man cooperating.
Anyone?
Ну, типу, в нас є деякий досвід.
Well, I assume that some of Ukraine's experience, recent experience, may be an answer to your question.
Саме про зміну корупційних лідерів, обраних відносно демократичним шляхом.
Because there was a democratically elected leader, very corrupt, and was removed.
Відповідно, ну, я не знаю, чи потрібно зараз переповідати історію Української революції Гідності, але я залюбки вам можу надіслати кілька книг.
That essentially is the story of Ukraine's revolution of dignity of 3 years ago. I can send you more information if you want to study that.
And when we were talking about trade and aid that comes to a country where there is corruption, do you think that there's enough of a condition attached to this where, you know, I mean, the benefits will go both ways. Do you think that countries that are willing to invest and do business, and even though they're trying to maybe build initial ties at first, is there enough conditionality there that it shouldn't be corrupt? Go for it, Cynthia.
I think that was the point I was trying to make just now, that with globalization, the world has opened up. The connectivity you were talking about, the dots are connecting everywhere. So we have open borders, we have free trade, liberalization of markets and so on, but the standards for governance hasn't caught up. So even in dealing with a corruption case, which is cross-border, we found out that through this cross-border, very complex financial flows through the 1MDB scandal, that jurisdictions in Switzerland and the United States and Singapore and the United Kingdom, these are the 4 main countries where the assets were stolen, could only investigate based on domestic jurisdiction. So if you're a lawyer and from the legal framework, you know that you cannot actually transcend your work across borders unless you have a mutual legal assistance between the countries. And normally the Attorney General has to consent to something like that. So in our country, the Attorney General has actually blocked the requests from Switzerland, Singapore, and the United States. So everyone's just investigating from a domestic perspective. So we don't have our standards matched up to the challenges of globalization. It's so clear that trade has really gone up so much in terms of priority of nations, but not the governance.
I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anyone there? In the back?
Maybe take a few questions.
I think we have time for a couple.
Thank you. My work and my colleagues' work focus, even though it has a global implication on Ethiopia. And my question to the panel is, at least in Ethiopia, we see two major underlying problems. One, wealth is transferred twice. First from the taxpayers, from the poor to the elites, and then it doesn't get reinvested in the country, it's transferred somewhere else, just more or less the Malaysian case. And I wonder how it is in your respective countries. The other major problem we observe is it's not only the political corruption, the government corruption. It seems to me there is a culture of corruption that is descending to the society as well. That actually even churches are part of the corruption. I have to give you an example, a nephew who wanted to be a priest in a church, and in order to get a church, he had to bribe his way. And in fact, when I was there a year ago, he asked me to help him finance for him to get a church. And I'm just wondering if in fact this is true in your respective countries as well.
Anyone want to grab that? Khalil?
من میخوایم که یک قسمت سوال شما رو که بیشتر مطرح شد بپردازم و ای که شما پرسان کردین که آیا فشارهای بین المللی میتونه تاثیرگذار باشه و من میخوایم بگم که کشورها وضعیت‌های متفاوت دارن. از دید من به عنوان یک فعال مدنی که در افغانستان فعالیت میکنم شاید پیشنهاد می باشه که به اندازه فشارهای بین المللی نتونه کمک بکنه پایین آمدن فساد در کشور. از او کرده میتونه حمایت های که شکل سیستماتیک باشه و بتونه نظام و حاکمیت قانون رو حمایت بکنه و از طرف پرسشگری رو برای مردم ایجاد بکنه و نقش مردم در نظارت بلند ببره، این بهتر میتونه در دراز مدت فساد اداری رو کاهش بده.
Before I answer your question, I would like to revert back to a question that you had earlier regarding the international community and their role in reducing corruption. I would like to reiterate my position that we have to always have a long-term approach in eliminating the culture of corruption in these societies that we are working. And one of them is, of course, by educating the citizens about their rights and their obligations, and to make sure that they're aware that there are corruptions, and to encourage them basically to take part and actively hold the government that is serving them accountable.
بلند بردن سطح توانایی و ظرفیت نهادهای مدنی، رسانه‌ها به عنوان نهادهایی که میتونن مردم را آگاهی بدن و فشار بیارن سر دولت و دولت‌ها، این میتونه بسیار کمک کرده.
We have to make sure that we ensure that institutions, especially independent institutions, they remain independent. And those include the civil society, those include media institutions, that they serve as watchdog entities and protect the interest of the citizens.
من فکر میکنم که هنوز امریکا در سطح بلندترین کمک کننده برای افغانستان هست.
In the case of Afghanistan, the United States is one of its biggest supporters.
من مطمئن هستم که ایالات متحده آمریکا برنامه برای نظارت، برای حسابگیری از کمک‌های خود برای افغانستان حداقل داره.
And I'm sure that the US is keeping a record and making sure that all the officials and all the aid that is given to Afghanistan is remaining accountable.
ما به عنوان کشوری که دموکراسی برای ما نوپا است و مثل اکتیف میمونه و کمک شما رو گرفتیم و تونستیم یک اندازه حرکت بکنیم در این راستا. من فکر میکنم که این حمایت ها باید همچنان ادامه داشته باشه و سر ظرفیت های ما کار بشه تا ما بتونیم حاکمیت قانون و حکومتداری خوب در افغانستان داشته باشیم.
I would like to reiterate that democracy in Afghanistan is still nascent. We are taking baby steps towards becoming a full functioning democracy where rule of law is being implemented, when there is good governance in the country, And for us to make sure that we are a fully democratic country, we do require your technical assistance, and we do require the capacities of the institutions, and particularly the civil society and media groups are built.
سوالی که دوستمون مطرح کردن میخوایم مطرح بکنم که طبعا ما هم نگران از این هستیم که در افغانستان هم اگر توجه کمتر صورت بگیره شاید فساد اداری به یک فرهنگ تبدیل بشه که اونا اشاره کردن.
With regard to your question, sir, I agree with you. It's similar the case in Afghanistan as well in terms of the culture of corruption. But the key is basically to educate the citizens and to make sure that they do not accept this culture of corruption.
این نگرانی ما تنها نیسته، تمام مردم در این قسمت نگران هستند و ما در افغانستان حداقل به طرف یک بسیج همگانی برای مبارزه با فساد حرکت میکنیم.
This is not the only thing that I as a civic activist I am worried about. What we do to reduce corruption is basically mobilize the citizens that it is your money and you have to basically protect and keep the authorities accountable.
کاری که ما به عنوان یک فعال مدنی میکنم است که سطح آگاهی مردم بلند ببرم و عواقب بد فساد اداری را برای از اونا تشریح بکنم تا اونا خودشان هر یک در این راستا فعال بشن.
Again, when you educate the citizens that you are receiving disadvantages from corruption, they themselves will take part in reporting corruption and making sure that there is rule of law and good governance in our countries.
I think what we've seen from your stories, even where corruption has existed, maybe as a part of trade and society for generations, now with connectivity, a wave of awareness and motivation can happen fairly quickly. And even if that doesn't change things, completely or permanently, it opens that door, and that in turn garners more international pressure. So, Khalil, Raphael, Claudia, Dennis, Cynthia, thank you so much for your stories that are not just enlightening but inspiring. Thank you.
So, on behalf of the endowment, I want to thank our fantastic moderator, Michelle Kaczynski, for joining us today. And of course, to our 5 really terrific and courageous activists for coming, some of you from far away, to the endowment to share with us your work. Thank you very much.